The rain hadn't stopped since morning, and neither had the shouting. Marcus Doyle stood with his arms crossed on the gravel path leading to his lake cabin, water dripping off the brim of his hat, staring down a man half his age who was jabbing a finger just inches from his chest. Behind the younger man, a woman in a cream blazer screamed something about property lines and lawyers, her voice cracking with a fury that had clearly been building for weeks. Marcus said nothing. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather badge wallet, and let it fall open in his palm. 4 words. That was all it took to end 30 years of somebody else's entitlement in a single, breathless second. If you believe in second chances, and if you believe kindness can outlast even the loudest cruelty, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a reminder that quiet people are often the strongest ones in the room, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's go back to where it all began. Marcus Doyle had bought the cabin 11 years earlier, back when his wife Carol was still healthy enough to help him haul furniture up the dock stairs. It sat on 2 acres at the north end of Miller's Lake, a modest wood-paneled place with a stone chimney and a porch that faced the water just right for sunset. He'd worked 31 years with the county police department, the last 9 of them as chief, and the cabin was supposed to be where all that weight came off his shoulders. Carol passed 2 winters ago, quietly, in her sleep, and since then the cabin had become something more than a retreat. It had become the only place where Marcus still felt like himself. He didn't talk about badges or titles at the lake. He wore flannel and drank coffee on the porch and waved at the Petersons next door and fixed his own dock when the ice cracked it every spring. Nobody out there knew what he did for a living, and that was exactly how he liked it. A man needed somewhere the world couldn't reach him. That was the whole point. The trouble started the spring after Carol died, when a new family moved into the lakefront property 2 lots down. Diane Kessler ran the homeowners association for that stretch of shoreline with the kind of ferocity usually reserved for war rooms. She had opinions about mailbox height, about boat covers, about the exact shade of brown a fence was permitted to be. Most of the neighbors simply nodded along and did what she asked, because arguing with Diane cost more energy than it was worth. Marcus, being new to her radar and quiet by nature, became an easy target. It began small. A letter about his firewood stack being too close to the property line. Another about his gravel driveway supposedly encroaching on a shared easement that, as it turned out, didn't exist. Marcus responded to each one politely, sometimes not at all, mostly because he assumed a woman who signed her emails, HOA board chair, Miller's Lake community, would eventually run out of things to complain about. She did not. If anything, his silence seemed to provoke her further, as if his calm was itself an insult she couldn't tolerate. By midsummer, Diane had convinced herself that Marcus's parcel, the one he held a clean deed to, purchased fair and outright 11 years prior, was somehow still part of a disputed easement her association had rights to. She brought in a lawyer cousin who drafted an aggressive letter full of legal language designed to intimidate rather than inform. When that didn't work, she sent her son. His name was Tyler, 26 years old, recently laid off from a sales job and living back home with his mother, and he showed up at Marcus's cabin on a wet Saturday morning with a stack of printed documents and a chip on his shoulder the size of the lake itself. He told Marcus, in a tone that started condescending and escalated fast, that the family had 30 days to vacate before the association took legal action to reclaim what he called community land. He said it like a man rehearsing a line from a movie, like he expected Marcus to crumble on the spot. When Marcus calmly asked to see the deed discrepancy in writing, Tyler laughed and said people like him always played dumb until the papers showed up. Marcus felt something old and tired stir in his chest, not anger exactly, but the particular fatigue of a man who has spent his whole career watching people abuse power they didn't actually have. He had seen bullies in uniform and bullies without one, and the pattern was always the same. They needed someone to look small so they could feel big. Diane arrived minutes later, apparently unable to let her son handle even this without supervision, and the volume rose fast. She accused Marcus of trespassing on land his family had legitimately owned for over a decade. She threatened fines that didn't exist under any bylaw she could actually produce. She told him, loud enough for the Petersons across the water to hear, that people like him didn't belong in a community like this, whatever unspoken thing she meant by that. Tyler stood beside her, jabbing his finger toward Marcus's chest, demanding he pack up and leave before they called the sheriff themselves. That was the moment Marcus reached into his jacket. He had learned long ago that the worst thing a person in power could do was announce it too early. Let people show you who they are first. Let them reveal the shape of their cruelty before you correct it, because once you flash the badge, the conversation is over, and you lose the chance to see the truth of someone's character. He had waited, watched, let Diane and Tyler dig themselves deeper into their own certainty, and only now, with the rain soaking through his flannel and their voices cracking with rage, did he open the leather wallet and hold it steady in his open palm. Chief of Police, it read, above his photograph and his badge number. 31 years of service beneath it. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Marcus had heard all summer. Tyler's finger, still raised mid-accusation, froze in the air. Diane's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. Somewhere behind them, an elderly couple walking their dog on the shoreline path stopped to watch, sensing that whatever was happening deserved witnesses. Marcus didn't gloat. That was never his style. He simply told them, in the same even voice he'd used all morning, that he'd welcome them calling the sheriff, since he happened to know the department rather well, and that he'd also welcome a look at the actual title records down at the county office, which he had already pulled 2 weeks earlier after the first strange letter arrived, and which showed no easement, no dispute, and no legal standing whatsoever for anything they were claiming. He told them the threats they'd made, the fabricated fines, the demand to vacate a legally owned property, could constitute harassment, and that he had no interest in filing a report unless they gave him further reason to. Tyler's bravado collapsed all at once, the way it often does in young men who've never actually been held accountable for anything. He mumbled something about a misunderstanding and took several steps back toward the car. Diane, for her part, tried one more round of indignation, insisting she'd only been trying to protect the community's interests, but her voice had lost its conviction entirely, replaced by the thin, shaky sound of someone realizing how badly they'd misjudged a situation. What happened over the following week surprised Marcus more than the confrontation itself. Diane didn't disappear in shame, though she could have. Instead, 3 days later, she showed up at his porch alone, without her son, without her lawyer cousin, and without a single printed document. She stood at the bottom of the steps for a long moment before asking if she could speak with him. Marcus, against every instinct built by years of being lied to and manipulated by people trying to save face, invited her up and poured her a cup of coffee. She told him things he hadn't expected. That her husband had left 2 years earlier. That Tyler's job loss had hit the household harder than she'd let on, and that somewhere in trying to control everything within her reach, the mailbox heights, the fence colors, the property lines, she had been trying to feel like she still had power over something in her life. It didn't excuse what she'd done, and she said so herself, her voice breaking in a way Marcus recognized from years of watching people finally run out of armor. She apologized, not with the polished non-apology of someone protecting their reputation, but with the raw, unrehearsed honesty of someone who had been carrying shame long before Marcus ever opened that badge wallet. Marcus didn't need her apology. He had 31 years of badges and confrontations behind him, and this one barely registered on the scale of things people had said to his face. But he understood something in that moment that mattered more than being right. He understood that Carol, if she'd been sitting beside him on that porch, would have told him that grace costs nothing and heals almost everything. So instead of holding on to the anger he was entitled to, he told Diane that everyone was allowed one bad season, so long as they didn't let it become a permanent address. Over the following months, something quietly shifted along that stretch of the lake. Diane stepped back from the HOA board, handing the role to someone with considerably less appetite for conflict. Tyler, oddly enough, started stopping by on weekends to help Marcus repair the dock, the same dock his mother had once falsely accused of encroaching on shared land. He never said much about it, but Marcus noticed the way the young man worked, quiet and focused, like someone trying to build back a version of himself he actually liked. By autumn, the three of them, an old police chief, a struggling young man, and a woman learning to let go of control, sat together on the porch some evenings, watching the sun drop behind the tree line without a single word about property lines. Marcus never told anyone else at the lake about that morning in the rain. He didn't need to. The story wasn't really about a badge, or a threat, or even the satisfying silence that followed his reveal. It was about what happened after, when the loudest people in the story chose to become the quietest, and the quietest man in the story chose not to hold on to the win. If this story moved something in you, if you believe people can find their way back from their worst moments, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Before you go, I want you to do one thing for me. Comment the word grace below if you believe second chances are worth giving, even to the people who least expect to receive them. Because in the end, Marcus Doyle didn't need his badge to win that morning by the lake. He only needed it to remind two lost people that dignity, once challenged, doesn't have to be defended with cruelty. Sometimes it just has to be shown, quietly, patiently, the way an old chief waits out a storm on his porch, certain that the rain always passes, and that most people, given the chance, will choose to come back into the light.